And after all that chaos, the dust settles and I welcome you back to part 26 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, where today we're gonna go through the first glimmers of the aftermath of this chaos. A lot of this chapter is just trying to find a way forward after this hell. It's surprising how they handle this, because in the original, after the plate comes crashing down, you don't spend that long on it. I know, as I always keep on saying about how the original, it was like 2 hours and you were done. But you really didn't spend that much time on it before you moved on to the next thing. You went back to Aerith's house to check on Marlene to see if Marlene actually was safely taken home. And then after that, you immediately make a beeline into trying to do a rescue effort for Aerith. In this, there's a lot more that needs to be done. And they use the opportunity to kind of give some heart and realism and grounding to what's going on with other characters. Spend a good while just listening to what people say when you go through this part, because there is a lot of world building.
I said, where you going?
Aerith's house. It's in the Sector 5 slums.
And that's where Marlene is?
Where we hope she is.
Tell me she is. Give me something to hang on to. Even if she's not, I won't blame you for it, I swear. Who am I kidding? I'd probably try to tear your head off.
Hey, Tifa. Know anything about ancients?
I know I've heard of them, at least.
They come up in planetology books. Meant to be the original stewards of the planet. Could even commune with it, talk to it and stuff.
That must be why the Turks wanted her so badly.
Within my veins flows the blood of ancients. This planet is my birthright. You have failed again, I see. But through suffering, you will grow strong. Isn't that what you want?
It's nothing. Let's go.
And we also get to introduce the Ancients. The original stewards of the planet. The ones that were here before, basically. Aerith's the last living Ancient, as we were told by Sung at the top of the plate, very briefly. The Ancients and what they believed to are, they're actually called the Cetra, but it's just what modern people have come to know them as. They were the people from before, they are the Ancients. It makes sense in that regard that they'd be called that. They weren't born as, these are the Ancients. No, they had their own name. It's just modern people looking back in history just call them as like a historic race, so Ancients it is. Colossal mistake I want to mention right now, and I'll mention it again next chapter, that I make in this recording because I just fucking forgot. And all the other things I was planning and making out, it just completely slipped my mind. In chapter 14, you will have free reign. Chapter 14 is the next side quest extravaganza. Chapter 13 is all the aftermath of the plate falling. 14 is just the last major side questathon. You can walk around, do what you want before you go on the main plot, whilst 15 onwards is main plot to the credits. In chapter 14, come back to the goddamn weapon shop in Wall Market. The Mithril Blade, or the Mithril Saber even, to use its actual name, is here for Cloud to buy. And it gives you, it's firstly it has a lot more materia slots than some of the other. I think it's the first weapon that will hit 6 materia slots out of Cloud's weaponry. It has slightly better magic, while still not compromising its physical damage as much as some other weapons do. And it gives Cloud a skill called Blade Beam, which I will, because I missed it, because I said my save right now, all my recording and whatnot's in chapter 15, so I've missed my opportunity. I just completely fucking forgot about it. It's entirely my bad. I'll have to show it properly in post-game with like an extra video. But the way Blade Beam works is that Cloud will slam the ground in front of him, it costs 1 ATB, and it will shoot 3 shockwaves across the ground that will chase after enemies. Actually, I say that they don't chase. The one goes straight ahead and 2 go slightly to the side, like, so it's like a 30-ish degree angle left and right, so it's got that kind of wide berth. It goes to a set distance and then goes out, giving Cloud a sort of ranged option, but not really, because it's only on the ground. Its real merit is that, similar to, say, Triple Slash or Triple Edge, it's that you can catch multiple enemies in it. And unlike Triple Edge, it's a lot looser in what that number can be. If there's a lot of enemies crowded around, well, you're going to hit a hell of a lot with that Blade Beam. And so it does have value in that regard. However, I think the skill's the weakest skill Cloud gets, next to Disorder. If it wasn't for Disorder existing, I would say Blade Beam's the worst skill in the game for Cloud. Disorder, I just feels worthless because it feels like it's not worth spending an ATB for 1 extra swing when pressing triangle would do the work for you with no ATB, you know?
Where I think she is.
But I digress. Blade Beam I don't think's that worth it, so I wasn't losing too much sleep over missing the weapon. I was more just gutted that I missed it to begin with. I won't miss the other weapon though that is of significance. And like I said, in post-game, even though there technically isn't a post-game, once we beat it and I do the extra videos, I'll absolutely go back and nab it to showcase what the weapon is. I just had it in my head that the Mithril Saber wasn't until later. I don't know why, I just had it in my head that it wasn't until like chapter 16 or 17. I know the last sword is like very late into it. It's like start of chapter 17 or very late chapter 16. But I just for some reason thought the Mithril Saber was like later on as well. As it's entirely on me because I had it in my head that it was later. I didn't even think to check the weapon shop in Wool Market, and if I had, I would have spotted it and got it. It's 3,000 gil, by the way, if you're wondering. Which there's no excuse to not have the money for it. But we're back at Aerith's house to check in on Marlene.
That's the house.
Marlene! Marlene! Where's Marlene? Is she here?
Barrett!
Sorry, I'm Barrett. Marlene's my little girl. Marlene, she's got short hair. She's cute as a button, with the heart of an angel. She was wearing, pink. She was wearing a pink dress today.
Upstairs.
Huh? Oh.
I said she's sleeping.
I want to see her too. Come on, let's go look in on her.
Keep it down. Don't wake her. Maybe you should join your friend upstairs.
Marlene, my baby. Thank God.
Shh. Shinra has my daughter now.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm the one who asked her to go get Marlene. We'd only just met, but she was so kind and helpful. I took advantage of her.
It's not your fault. It was only a matter of time before she ended up back there.
Because she's an ancient. That it?
So she told you about that. She must trust you all a great deal. Yes, Aerith is an ancient. Probably the last one living. She's not my daughter. Not by blood, I mean. If that's what you were wondering. About 15 years ago. My husband, he'd been shipped off to fight on the front lines. But then I received a letter saying he'd be home for a bit. So when the day came, I went to the station to meet him. But he didn't come. I couldn't help fearing the worst, even then. But I told myself his leave must have been postponed, that he'd been delayed. Every day I went, to wait and to pray. And that's how I met her and her mother. I thought maybe they'd run away from Wall Market, or that they were topsiders fallen on hard times. I'd seen that sort of thing a lot. Take Aerith somewhere safe. Those were her mother's dying words. My husband had been away for so long, and I was lonely. So I convinced myself the safest place for the girl was with me. It took no time at all for her to start feeling like family. She was a real chatterbox. She told me strange stories, like how she and her mother had escaped from some sort of facility, and how she wasn't sad because her mother had just returned to their planet.
Their planet, huh? Yeah, that sounds about right.
I didn't understand any of it at the time. When I asked if she meant one in the sky, she said no, this one, right here. I mean, what can you say to that?
Mommy, don't be sad.
That's what she said to me one day, out of the blue. So I asked her, what's wrong?
A man you really, really loved just died. His heart came a long way to say goodbye. But he couldn't stay because he had to return to the planet.
I didn't believe her, of course. And then, a few days later, I received a letter saying my husband had been killed in action. Things like that, she'd just know. It was a lot to deal with, but we were happy. And then came the knock.
Coming! No! Go away!
Aerith, you know you're not just any little girl. You're a descendant of the ancients.
I had no idea what he meant, so I said, "Who are the ancients?"
They were the original stewards of the planet, whose boundless knowledge and wisdom shall guide us to the promised land. Some believe the promised land to be a myth, others an allegory of sorts. But we take the words of the scriptures at face value and believe it to be quite real. Which is why Shinra would like very much for Aerith to help us.
You're wrong! I'm not an ancient!
But Aerith, even when you're all alone, don't you hear voices whispering secrets?
No, never!
But all three of us knew that wasn't true. That man knew exactly who Aerith was, where she'd come from, and what she could do.
They knew where she was, but they didn't just take her? Doesn't sound like the Turks I know.
She had to come willingly, otherwise it wouldn't work, they said. That's why, even if they did take her away, I'm sure she's still being treated like a guest. And that they'll send her straight back home once they get what they need.
I doubt it.
You're not planning anything, are you? Don't make things worse than they already are. If I lost her too, I don't know if I could ever. Just don't.
Cloud, maybe she's right about this. Maybe they'll let Aerith go when it's all over. Maybe we'd be better off waiting a little while.
Let's head back to Sector 7. Got things to take care of. Like checking up on the bar.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there you have it. The big bad corporation known as Shinra are actually a bunch of religious nutjobs who firmly believe that the Cetra, or I said the Ancients, are the ticket to paradise, the ticket to this promised land that will give them everything they've ever so desired. Yeah, that's genuinely what they're after. That's genuinely what they believe in and fight for. That's why they want Aerith, because they believe that Aerith will somehow miraculously know how to take them to the promised land. Obviously, it's not as simple as that, and it's easy for us to know that, but they seem very adamant on it, and will do every process possible to try and get it their way. Something that we'll learn more and more about as and when we start making our rescue mission to save Aerith, because despite Elmira's insistence that we shouldn't, obviously that's not going to stop us. Oh, thanks Chadley, thanks for caring. He's like, oh, thanks for doing thanks for still being alive. Anyway, I've got more battle intel for you. I don't think we unlock, yeah, I think we're still a little away from unlocking the next VR mission. We're close though, I know we are. As I said, the biggest thing that holds people up from unlocking the next VR mission is the hit 200% on stagger. If you don't know about the whole thing with Tifa, you're gonna get stuck. We see that new battle intel is available, so I immediately turned back and talked to him again, so I'm like, hey, can you give me stuff?
I've developed a new material.
Then I even checked. But you want to do these battle intel because now we get enemy skill. Like I said, enemy skill has, if you have it equipped, when you're hit by an enemy of certain skill, there is a chance you will get it for yourself. There's 4 that you can get in Remake Part 1. One of them is tied to basically post-game though, so don't worry about getting it now. And one of them you should never use under any circumstance. It's 2 ATB to self-destruct. It kills you instantly but does good damage to enemies around. It's not worth it. But enemy skill as a whole, I'm going to just say it outright, I don't find much worth in Remake Part 1. I think it is one of the weaker elements of it. I know they give it to you here and more to put it in your mind that it's there and something that you can start working towards if you want. But because it's so limited, only being Part 1, all the skills that make enemy skills so fantastic in the original 7 aren't in this. And they probably won't be until future parts because, you know, it's kind of well known how overpowered they are. That being Beta, which is a skill that you got from the Midgard giant snake thing that you got just outside the town of Calm. If you dared to face that thing super early, you could get Beta like really early. And if you somehow like you had to use like fire resistance materia, but if you survived, oh, you just got like an amazing like early to mid game wiper. And the other one was Big Guard, which, to be fair, Big Guard's technically in this game. It's just you have to work a little harder for it. Big Guard is Protect and Shell at the same time. Which is Protect, as I said, both of them have their own like unique naming in this game, but they changed the naming for them weirdly enough, even though it's been Protect and Shell for like the entire franchise, but whatever. But Protect is resistance to physical damage, Shell is the same but magic damage. Big Guard did both at once. Like I said, that is actually in this game. When you get the barrier and mana wall materia, the maxed out version of it gives you a skill that does both. So Big Guard is technically in this game, so you just have to max out that materia first and get it. They've already kind of made a balanced version. But it's not quite the same, obviously, as being able to just go into your enemy skill and immediately whip out Big Guard. And at some point, maybe for comparison, I would love to do a Let's Play of base Final Fantasy VII, like the original version, just so you can see what it did different and what to expect in the future. The biggest problem is I'd have to check if they ever patched out the blocked scenes. And call it 100, I don't think they did. I think it wasn't when I went for it on PS4 a couple years ago, and just call it 100, I just don't think it ever did. Significant scenes, like plot spoilery scenes of base 7 have blocked scenes on PlayStation, and the entire like final scenario is also blocked on PlayStation. Like the last hour is just blocked. And until they get rid of it, I can't cover it unless I'd have to, you know, like borrow footage. But there's also a fight that's blocked, so it would have to like, it would be a whole thing, and I just wouldn't want to do it like that. It just, no. But if they ever do get rid of those blocks, I'd have to check, because I haven't actually got it installed on my PS5 to even know if there has been an update. But if they ever do, maybe I'll consider doing it. I won't do it next. The next time I do a Final Fantasy game, as I've said before, it will hopefully be Final Fantasy IV off of the Pixel remasters, assuming they come to console. If they never do, I'll see what mood I'm in. Because Final Fantasy IX's still on the table. I'd like to do 9 at some point. Oh, there's the fleeing thing popping up. That's like the first time I had the opportunity to actually show it, because it's such a small arena. If you get out the edge of the arena, it comes saying fleeing in the top, so it knows that you're trying to get out. But 9 is on the table. 10, 10 we'd have to see. I never got back to those live streams from like 6 years ago to actually finish that, and I don't even know if they're on the channel anymore. I think I might have got rid of them a couple of years back just because I knew I was never getting back to them. But yeah, Final Fantasy X is somewhere. I'd like to be honest, I've mentioned it before, but it's not on PS4 and PS5 as of this recording. But there's a part of me that would genuinely like to cover the 13 trilogy, and I know that might sound like sacrilege to some of you, but I genuinely would, because I think there are some merits to that trilogy. The first game less so, personally. I think 13.1 definitely has some problems, and I've even spoken about it before, where it's like the biggest problem with the game is that I don't think it gets good to the last disc. It's like disc 3. And there's no way on this God's green earth you can convince anyone on this planet to spend 20 plus to 30 plus hours on a game before it gets to the good bit. And that's the biggest curse of 13. But I don't hate 13 for what it is. Even those first two like discs, I don't think's that bad. It has problems. Holy shit, does it have problems? But it doesn't mean I hate it. I actually really like appreciate them for what they are, even if they stumbled a lot along the way. And I'd want to cover 13, more so because then I could cover 13.2, which I genuinely really like 13.2. I have a lot of time for 13.2, and for the longest time, it was actually my top 3 favourite Final Fantasies. Yeah, like a couple years ago when I started marathoning the series, there are some games that I was like, no, actually, these are actually really fucking good. I can't put 13.2 above it, as much as I really like 13.2. So it did kind of stumble down the list. I'd say it's like 5th or 6th in terms of my favourites now. But I still really like it, and it would also give me a reason to actually try Lightning Returns properly, because Lightning Returns stands for me as the only Final Fantasy game I have never finished, and it's because I played the demo when it was originally about to make the rounds. Didn't like the whole time limit thing, because I know as much as people loved Majora's Mask, it was the same thing that put me off Majora's Mask. I'd like to go entirely at my own pace. The moment the game puts a timer on me, I don't enjoy it as much, and when the whole game is focused around the timer, I especially don't like it. And so when I played the demo and realised that's what Lightning Returns was doing, I just went pass. I just went, nah, I'm good, I'll play something else. As in, that doesn't mean I think it's bad, in the same vein that I don't for a second think Majora's Mask is bad. I know why people really love Majora's Mask, it's just I'm not a fan of there always being a time limit when you play. I always prefer to go at my own pace. Time limit-esque sections, it depends how they're balanced and how they're handled. If they're like extremely tight, then I'm gonna not like them because once again it's challenging your pace. Sort of like that ending section in The End Is Nigh. If any of you have played that ending section in that, how difficult that game is anyway, that like 6-ish minute time limit becomes hellishly tight. Like once you get comfortable, it's not too bad, and you can make the run in like 2.5 minutes. But it doesn't change the fact that it's hell on your first run trying to figure out how to get through it and get through it in time. It's very stressful. But time limits as a whole, so I'm just not keen on. So when the whole game's based around it, I just skip Lightning Returns. But if they ever did like a 13 trilogy on PS4 and PS5, which to be honest, I'm kind of surprised they haven't done yet. And before you say that, oh well, that's just because people didn't like them. No. They all sold pretty damn well. I think Lightning Returns was the only one that didn't sell like extremely brilliantly. And it was because they were actually really well appreciated in Japan. It was in the West that a lot of the negativity surrounding 13 came about. And even then, a lot of the hatred for 13 came about from it being extremely overhyped back when it was being advertised. To such an extent that it'd be like considered the greatest thing ever, when in reality it was never going to be that. Also, here's me desperately trying to get another enemy skill, which is why I'm letting this thing beat the shit out of Cloud. And it just doesn't give it to me, so eventually I say, you know what, screw this. I'm not that interested. And I think it's actually because it teaches self-destruct. And I already got self-destruct from a different enemy, and I just thought it had its own unique one, but no, it just happened to work out that I got it that way. But because of it, I got beat the hell out of. Just a necessary evil. But yeah, the 13 trilogy did really well in Japan, were very much more appreciated. It was just in the West, it was stupendously over-advertised. And when people realised that the game was ultimately just okay, I think that's the best way to put it. Like, it isn't the worst thing ever made that a lot of people make it out to be. It's just okay. And that's the problem. Is that it needed to be great because everyone had hyped it up to such a ridiculous extent through advertisement and whatnot that it was going to be the next Final Fantasy VII. It was going to be the next best thing. You don't need a 7 remake because Lightning, whose name is literally in reference to Cloud, is all you'll ever need. It's like she's the replacement. That was what the advertisement was going for. You'd never need a 7 remake because 13 was going to be the next best thing. And so then when it turned out to be, yeah, it was alright, but that was it. People fucking hated that. It was not what they expected, and the disappointment turned into vicious hatred. And so 13 gets thrown under the bus severely as like the worst Final Fantasy ever, when it is nowhere near close the worst Final Fantasy ever. It's okay, and which already makes it better than Final Fantasy 2. The fact that it's alright makes it better than 2. I prefer it over Final Fantasy 8. But personally, I think that Final Fantasy 8 only gets good in the last act as well, like 13. The only problem is that in 8 you can break it in half, and so you can make it piss easy as well, and so it becomes more boring, and so I just found it less interesting. Oh, I think this is me finally putting on Subversion to start leveling it up, to try and get Dispel and start working towards that final battle intel on the hopes that I get it. But then saying that, now that I know I've missed the Mithril Saber, if I don't get all the battle intel done in the main game, I'm not as fast. Like, it'll still be a little disappointing that I won't get a main game opportunity to show off the final summon. But at the same time, it also means, okay, there's more things to fill out post-game videos then. It won't just be me having to clean up what I couldn't do in the main game. It will also be me cleaning up stuff I missed. And so it'll just be that little bit bigger and have just that little bit more content in it so we don't get a Neptunia reverse again. But next year might end up having a lot of other little things as well. Like I've mentioned many times before about my big 3 that I want to do. That being Evil Within 2, Final Fantasy 4 and Tales of Arise. But if that 5th mainline Neptunia, assuming it is mainline like everything seems to be suggesting it is, if that comes out in the West next year, I'm probably going to want to cover that sooner rather than later. And especially so because it's a Neptunia game, and we're long since past the first game and its difficulty imbalance. So I imagine it won't be that bad. It'll be kind of smooth sailing. Kind of like how when I did Death End Request 2, it was literally like 5 seconds after I did my first 2 playthroughs on it. So it was very fresh on me to go through and like tackle, and it was very easy going. Even though the story sure as hell wasn't. The story was very fucking deep and like hellishly dark in places. It was the gameplay that I knew I'd be able to flow through it relatively easily, so it didn't bother me. It was fine. But speaking of Death End, it's entirely just theory work, but I think we'll hear some things on Death End 3 finally next year. And the reason why I think that is because I feel like the dev team that co-develops it, the GJRPG, although I don't know how involved they are in Mary Skeletor Final as a whole, it very much felt like they were definitely stepping to one side to let Mary Skeletor Finale take the spotlight. And if that's the case, then yeah, absolutely, Mary Skeletor Finale is out now. I expect their next thing to be announced. And with how much they set things up, yeah, I think the third game's coming. Personally, I think release schedule-wise, I think Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters will be Idea Factory and Compile Hearts publishing priority next year. That will be their big RPG of 2022. And it might be early 2023 or early to mid 2023 that Death End 3 will come out. And if that's the case, that's fine. Because at least to me personally, I know there's been outliers to this, but I just think two large-scale JRPGs together in the same year would be kind of crazy. Like, so I'm aware that Death End 1 and Dragonstar Varnir came out the same year when they came out. But still, there's just a part of me that thinks they want a lot of time and effort on their new RPG with Sisters vs. Sisters, especially with it taking a slightly more action-y focus with things while still having all the RPG stuff and turn-esque middle grounding that feels very inspired from what we've seen from games like, the VII Remake. I feel like their priority is going to be on that, the show where all their money from all the 1,000,001 spin-offs we've been having over the years actually went to. And so they're going to do that, and then the year after we'll get Death End 3. Which also puts Death End 3, if my theory ends up being true, in an interesting situation. Because Death End 2 was it was a PS4 title, using their old engine. And I'd be curious to see if Death End 3... there's a part of me that thinks Death End 3 will still use the old engine. I think Sisters v Sisters is the first shot at the new engine, but it doesn't mean it will become the standard rule immediately. I imagine there are other development projects that are underway and in development that just so happen to be already started before this new engine was kind of shown off. And I think Death End 3 is a part of that. I think Death End 3 will be on the old engine. It might incorporate some things from it, but I still think it will do its own thing for a whole. But I think it will be a PS5 title, and I'll be very curious to see if it is, what quality of life it gets. Because I mentioned before, some of the oddities with Death End 2 on PS4 is that the main menu's in 60, the game's at 30. The game's frame rate is kind of weirdly handled in places. And so I'd be really curious to see how they handle it in Death End 3, to see if they, actually make it run at a better frame rate. Yeah, if it's full turn-based like Death End 1 and 2, which I kind of hope it is. Neptunia making the shift is one thing, but I don't think Death End needs to make it as well. I think Death End's combat is good in its own turf. But I'd be curious to see what changes on the shift up after a couple years.
Weimer! You're alive!
Still in one piece?
Who else made it out?
I wish I knew. Sorry.
It's fine.
I'm just glad you survived. Gives me hope for the others.
Going back to the topic of the game though, now I've been talking about everything I hope for future years. Chapter 13, like a lot of the extra content in this game, I'm glad it exists because Barrett needed a chapter like this.
Sure they are, honey. Don't worry.
Every character in the original 7 got so much time for character development and growth that it made them such a lovable cast. Even characters that joined kinda late got their own thing. Even characters that were technically optional got their own story threads and own character development. But Barrett really doesn't start until after Midgar.
Yeah.
There's glimmers of it, but there's really not much for Barrett in the original game until after you leave Midgar in terms of his character development and learning more about him and why he is the way he is. You can buy Big Bertha from this dude. fucking do so. Big Bertha gives, like, literally the best skill Barrett's ever gonna get. But the way they did it instead is that chapter 13, you'll get into it properly in the next video, is very much the Barrett chapter. It is entirely Barrett's perspective of accepting that there's consequences to his actions. That everything he did, yes, Shinra, as he rightly stated, Shinra's the one that pulled the plug at the end to drop the plate and made that decision to do so. But countless lives were ruined because of this Splinter Cell faction of Avalanche's actions, because of their aggressive nature and what they'd done. Because they've been mentioned before, they're outcasted from the rest of Avalanche. They're not considered a part of them because of their more extremist approach. But their actions has now resulted in Shinra countering, and now, yeah, not as high many deaths as it could have been. Many lives were ruined, houses were destroyed, and people that he loves and cared for are gone. Biggs and I need to say Tifa. Biggs and Jesse are no more. And I think that's the worst part, as at this point, it kind of crossed my mind and it went, they haven't actually told Barrett that Biggs and Jesse is dead yet. We don't know about Wedge. We don't know what happened to Wedge. We saw in that ending scene that the plate started collapsing him whilst he was fending cats, but we haven't got his kill confirmed, so to speak. So that's up to you for now. But still, like, they haven't told Barrett yet. Like, he hasn't had processed it. And even earlier, like when we were back with Elmira, and he went, oh, we should go back to Sector 7 and check on the bar. Yeah, he spoke a bit slower, like he kind of realised what he said as he said it. But it was still the fact that he hasn't processed that he's lost that much yet. Like, it hasn't hit him, and it's going to throughout the course of this chapter, as you can probably imagine. But anyway, what that entails, you'll have to wait and see for. Next time on the Final Fantasy VII Remake, we go through the wreckage of Sector 7 and see what we can find. Until then, take care.